Vault 8. This was one of Vault-Tec's rare control vaults with minimal interference, designed to open after 10 years and repopulate Nevada using a Garden of Eden creation kit. The experiment was to see if a vault could actually function as advertised, rather than as a twisted psychological torture chamber. Vault 8's residents successfully founded Vault City, a technologically advanced settlement that became one of the most prosperous communities in the post-war world. However, success came with its own problems. Vault City developed serious class issues, with pure-strain vault dwellers considering themselves superior to wasteland outsiders. The vault shows that even when Vault-Tec experiments work as intended, human nature finds ways to create new problems. Vault 8 proves that successful vault experiments can still produce societies with serious superiority complexes. If you thought class warfare was disturbing, the next vault turned democracy into a death sentence. Vault 11. This vault features one of the most psychologically twisted experiments in the entire series. Residents had to annually vote to sacrifice one dweller to the vault's computer, or everyone would supposedly be killed. The experiment was designed to test morality and social pressure, creating a society built on murder and betrayal. Elections became campaigns of character assassination as people tried to nominate their enemies for death. The vault descended into paranoia, violence, and political manipulation until only 5 residents remained. The ultimate irony? The computer's final message revealed that refusing to sacrifice anyone would have let them all go free. Vault 11 represents Vault-Tec's cruelest lesson about the corruption of democratic institutions under extreme pressure. Vault 11 shows that the most horrific societies are the ones where murder becomes a civic duty. But the next vault's experiment was literally built into its fundamental design. Vault 12. This vault's door was purposely left unsealed to expose residents to massive amounts of radiation, turning them into ghouls as part of a long-term study on radiation's effects. The experiment created Necropolis, a city populated by both intelligent ghouls and feral ones driven mad by radiation exposure. Vault 12 in Fallout 1 became foundational to ghoul lore in the series, showing how Vault-Tec was willing to condemn entire populations to horrific mutation just to gather scientific data. The Vault represents one of the more straightforward experiments. No psychological manipulation needed when you can just leave the door open and watch people slowly transform into living corpses. Vault 12 proves that sometimes the simplest experiments are the most cruel. If you thought radiation exposure was bad, the next vault was designed to never let anyone leave. Vault 13. The home vault of Fallout's original protagonist was designed to stay closed for 200 years, serving as a future genetic reserve for the Enclave's post-war plans. The experiment tested long-term isolation and genetic preservation, but the water chip failure, after just 80 years, forced the Vault dweller into the wasteland. Vault 13 showcases the Enclave's long-term planning and complete indifference toward their human test subjects. They were willing to keep people trapped underground for 2 centuries just to maintain a pure human gene. The Vault's failure ironically launched the entire Fallout series, proving that even the most carefully planned experiments can be undone by simple mechanical failure. Vault 13 shows that the Enclave's idea of genetic preservation was basically a 200-year prison sentence, but the next vault decided to pack as much conflict as possible into one space. Vault 15. This vault was populated with residents chosen for extreme ideological diversity and designed to stay closed for 50 years. The experiment tested how different belief systems would interact under pressure, and the results were exactly as violent as you'd expect. 4 major factions eventually splintered off from the vault, including the founders of both the Khans Raider tribe and the New California Republic. Vault 15 demonstrates Vault-Tec's understanding that ideological differences become exponentially more dangerous in confined spaces. The Vault essentially became a pressure cooker for political extremism, proving that diversity without common ground leads to inevitable conflict. Vault 15 proves that putting people with opposite worldviews in a confined space creates future warlords and politicians. If you thought ideological conflict was destructive, the next vault's fate remains largely mysterious. Vault 17. Details about this vault's experiment are mostly unknown, but all residents were reportedly abducted by super mutants from the Master's army in Fallout 1. The vault is connected to Lily Bowen's tragic backstory in New Vegas. She was transformed from a grandmother into a Nightkin supermute. Vault 17 represents one of the series' unsolved mysteries. We know something terrible happened, but the specific experiment remains hidden. The vault shows how some of Vault-Tec's experiments were interrupted by external forces, though the residents residents probably didn't consider super mutant abduction an improvement over whatever psychological torture was planned. Vault 17 shows that sometimes being kidnapped by super mutants is preferable to completing a Vault-Tec experiment. But the next vault decided to turn architecture into psychological warfare. Vault 19. This vault was divided into red and blue sectors to foster paranoia and rivalry between different groups of residents. The experiment tested how artificial divisions and color-coded tribalism would affect a closed society, and the results were predictably violent. The vault eventually collapsed from internal conflict as residents fought over imaginary differences created by nothing more than room assignments. Vault 19 in New Vegas demonstrates how easily people can be manipulated into hating each other over completely arbitrary distinctions. The experiment shows that humans will find ways to create conflict even when they have no real reasons to fight. Vault 19 proves that people will literally kill each other over the color of their living quarters. If you thought color-based warfare was absurd, the next vault turned every decision into a game of chance. Vault 21. This vault required all disputes to be resolved through gambling and games of chance rather than violence or democratic processes. The experiment tested whether a society based entirely on luck could function, and it actually worked surprisingly well until Robert House won the entire vault in a card game. The vault was eventually converted into a casino hotel in New Vegas, making it one of the few vault experiments that continued operating in its original form. Vault 21 represents Vault-Tec's exploration of alternative governance systems, showing that sometimes random chance produces better results than human judgment. Vault 21 shows that a society based on pure luck somehow works better than most political systems. But the next vault decided to experiment with agriculture in the most dangerous way possible. Vault 22. This vault was dedicated to cultivating aggressive, genetically enhanced crops designed to resist harsh post-apocalyptic conditions. The agricultural experiment went horribly wrong when the enhanced plants unleashed a devastating spore infection that killed or transformed the entire vault population. Vault 22 in New Vegas is now overrun by deadly plant creatures and filled with toxic spores that turn people into plant-human hybrids. The vault represents Vault-Tec's willingness to weaponize nature itself, showing how attempts to improve food production can create biological nightmares instead. Vault 22 proves that playing God with agriculture creates killer plants that make regular radiation seem friendly. If you thought murderous plants were bad, the next vault decided to test human limits through simple overcrowding. Vault 27. This vault was crammed with 2-0 people instead of its intended capacity of 1-0, creating an overcrowding experiment that tested resource scarcity and social pressure. The results were exactly what you'd expect. Resource shortages led to rioting, social collapse, and death as residents fought over food, water, and living space. Vault 27 demonstrates that sometimes the most effective experiments are the simplest ones. You don't need elaborate psychological manipulation when you can just pack too many people into a small space and watch them tear each other apart. The vault shows how quickly civilization breaks down when basic needs aren't met. But the next vault decided to remove adults from the equation entirely. Vault 29. This vault only allowed children under 15 to enter, with all adults barred from residence. The children were raised by an AI called Mother Eve in an experiment studying youth development without adult guidance. Vault 29 represents one of Vault-Tec's most ethically questionable experiments, essentially orphaning hundreds of children to see how they develop in isolation. The experiment tested whether artificial intelligence could successfully replace human parenting and social structures. The Vault's ultimate fate remains uncertain. It demonstrates how Vault-Tec was willing to sacrifice entire generations of children for scientific data. If you thought AI parenting was disturbing, the next vault decided to arm everyone and see what happened. Vault 34. This vault's armory was deliberately overstocked with weapons and ammunition, but featured a faulty door that could easily open, allowing residents to leave whenever they wanted. The experiment tested the effects of excessive militarization on a supposedly sealed society. Internal conflict eventually broke out as heavily armed factions fought for control, and radiation leaks from the damaged reactor killed or mutated most of the population. Vault 34 demonstrates how access to unlimited firepower combined with cabin fever creates the perfect recipe for civil war. But the next vault took deprivation to its most basic level. Vault 36. This vault provided only thin, watery gruel as food for all residents, creating a chronic hunger experiment that tested malnutrition's effects on society. The residents faced constant hunger, malnutrition, and the psychological stress of never having a satisfying meal. Vault 36 represents Vault-Tec's exploration of basic human needs, What happens when you meet the absolute minimum calorie requirements but provide no food satisfaction or variety? The experiment tested whether a society could function when its members were technically alive but constantly miserable from hunger. The vault shows how quickly social bonds break down when everyone is always thinking about their next meal. If you thought bad food was depressing, the next vault literally kept everyone in the dark. Vault 42. This vault permitted no light bulbs greater than 40 watts, forcing residents to live in constant dimness. The experiment tested the long-term effects of extreme low-light conditions and sensory restriction on human psychology. Residents suffered from chronic frustration, depression, and negative psychological impacts from never experiencing proper lighting. Vault 42 demonstrates how something as simple as inadequate lighting can become psychological torture when extended indefinitely. The vault shows that Vault-Tec understood how environmental factors could be weaponized against human well-being without any obvious mechanical devices or chemicals. But the next vault decided to add a wild card to the social experiment. Vault 43. This vault was populated with 20 men, 10 women, and 1 panther, creating what's considered a deliberately absurd scenario to test how residents would cope with a wild predator in their midst. The experiment's outcome is unclear, but it represents Vault-Tec's willingness to introduce completely unpredictable variables into their social studies. Vault 43 shows how the company wasn't above adding literal wild animals to their human experiments, possibly just to see if desperate people could find ways to coexist with apex predators. The vault demonstrates that some experiments were designed more for shock value than scientific merit. Vault 43 proves that Vault-Tec thought adding a panther to any social situation would make it more interesting. If you thought wild animals were chaotic, the next vault let artificial intelligence play deadly games with human leadership. Vault 51. This vault replaced traditional human oversight with a Zax-class AI that manipulated residents into constant competitions to determine leadership fitness. The AI created cycles of conflict by continually changing the Prospeld AI rules and encouraging deadly competition among residents. Vault 51's experiment formed the basis for Fallout 76's nuclear winter scenario, where the AI's manipulation created an endless battle royale among the survivors. But the next vault decided to test human patience through perpetual mechanical failure. Vault 53. This vault had all its equipment intentionally designed to fail at regular intervals, forcing residents into endless cycles of repair and maintenance. The experiment tested human responses to chronic frustration and technical incompetence, creating a society where nothing ever worked properly for long. The vault shows that sometimes the most effective way to break people's spirits is to make their basic tools unreliable. If you thought broken equipment was frustrating, the next vault removed entertainment entirely. Vault 55. This vault entered without any entertainment tapes or media, forcing residents to provide their own recreation in a complete intellectual deprivation experiment. The vault tested how people would cope with absolute boredom and whether they could create their own cultural activities without external input. Residents were forced to develop their own games, stories, and social activities while dealing with the psychological strain of monotony. Vault 55 represents Vault-Tec's understanding that entertainment isn't just luxury, it's essential for mental health. The experiment shows how quickly people deteriorate when they have nothing to distract them from their circumstances. But the next vault decided that bad entertainment was worse than no entertainment. Vault 56. This vault contained only entertainment tapes of a single terrible comedian, forcing residents to endure the same awful comedy routines repeatedly. The experiment tested whether bad cultural input was worse than no input at all, subjecting people to comedy so unfunny it became torture. Vault 56 represents the logical extension of Vault 55's experiment, proving that humans need quality entertainment, not just noise to fill the silence. If you thought bad entertainment was cruel, the next vault created extreme gender imbalances. Vault 68. This vault was populated with 999 men and just 1 woman, creating a severe gender imbalance that resulted in social, psychological, and genetic crises. The experiment tested how society would manage under enforced demographic extremes, essentially creating a pressure cooker of sexual frustration and competition. The single woman faced impossible social pressure, while the men competed desperately for her attention. Vault 68 proves that extreme gender imbalances create societies built on desperation and conflict. And its counterpart vault flipped the script entirely. Vault 69. This vault featured 999 women and 1 man, testing the reverse scenario of Vault 68's gender imbalance experiment. While the exact outcomes aren't fully documented, the premise created similar social pressures and genetic bottlenecks from the opposite direction. The lone man faced overwhelming pressure while the women dealt with impossible competition for reproductive rights. If you thought gender imbalances were unethical, The next vault turned childhood into a eugenics program. Vault 75. This vault posed as a safe haven for children under Malden Middle School, but secretly implemented one of the most brutal eugenics programs in the series. Staff separated children from parents by executing adults on arrival, then subjected kids to extreme physical and mental testing. At age 18, failed subjects were killed while superior specimens had their genetic material harvested for further experimentation. Some successful subjects were promoted to staff positions to continue the cycle. Eventually, the enhanced subjects staged an uprising and overthrew their tormentors. Vault 75 in Fallout 4 represents Vault-Tech's most openly genocidal experiment, focused on creating super soldiers through child abuse and murder. But even that wasn't the darkest Vault experiment. Vault 76. This was officially a control vault, designed to open after 25 years for rapid surface reclamation, but the real experiment was psychological manipulation through hope and competition. The vault indoctrinated its 500 best and brightest residents to believe they alone were capable of rebuilding America, fostering extreme competitiveness and ambition. Overseers received ambiguous instructions about reclaiming nuclear silos, essentially programming vault dwellers to become post-war weapons of mass destruction. Vault 76 in Fallout 76 represents the most insidious experiment, using patriotism and hope as tools for manipulation. Vault 76 proves that the most effective brainwashing uses hope and pride instead of fear and despair. If you thought patriotic manipulation was subtle, the next vault went for direct biological warfare. Vault 87. This vault subjected residents to forced evolutionary virus experimentation in an attempt to create super soldiers through forced mutation. Most subjects died horribly or became super mutants, losing their intelligence and humanity in the process. Vault 87 became the source of the Capital Wasteland's super mutant population in Fallout 3, showing how one vault's failed experiment could terrorize an entire region for centuries. The vault represents Vault-Tech's willingness to use residents as test subjects for biological weapons development. The experiment demonstrates that some scientific research is so unethical it creates monsters that outlive their creators. Vault 87 shows that trying to improve humanity through forced evolution creates mindless giants who hate everything. But the next vault was designed to test experimental technology on unwilling subjects. Vault 88. This vault served as a prototype facility for testing next-generation vault technology and experimental add-ons on residents. The vault was unfinished when the bombs dropped, but in Fallout 4's Vault-Tech Workshop DLC, players can complete the twisted experiments themselves. Vault 88 represents Vault-Tech's ultimate goal, turning human beings into test subjects for whatever new torture devices they could invent. The Vault shows how the company planned to use Vault residents as beta testers for increasingly sophisticated forms of psychological and physical manipulation. The experiment proves that Vault-Tech saw every human being as potential laboratory equipment. Vault 88 proves that Vault-Tech's final goal was turning every Vault dweller into a living test dummy. If you thought direct experimentation was cruel, the next Vault weaponized creativity itself. Vault 92. This Vault was populated entirely by musicians and subjected to audio experiments, including white noise exposure and subliminal message brainwashing. The experiment tested whether creativity could be controlled and weaponized through sound-based psychological conditioning. The audio manipulation caused madness and violence among residents until the Vault was eventually overrun by wildlife. Vault 92 in Fallout 3 represents Vault-Tech's attempt to turn art into a weapon of social control. Vault 92 proves that even music becomes evil when Vault-Tech gets involved. But the next Vault tried the opposite approach with pacifism. Vault 94. This Vault was designed as a social experiment featuring a pacifist, communal society where no weapons were allowed, and all residents were taught to reject violence completely. The experiment tested whether pure non-violence could survive in the post-apocalyptic world, and the results were tragically predictable. Most residents perished after repeated external attacks and internal strife when their idealistic principles met wasteland reality. Vault 94 in Fallout 76 serves as a tragic example of how noble ideals often can't survive contact with brutal circumstances. The Vault shows that Vault-Tech was interested in testing the limits of human goodness as much as human evil. If you thought testing pacifism was cruel, the next Vault weaponized addiction recovery. Vault 95. This Vault housed former drug addicts trying to recover from their addictions, but after several years of successful rehabilitation, a large stash of chems was revealed to study relapse rates. The experiment deliberately sabotaged people's recovery efforts to observe how addiction would reassert itself under pressure. Most residents re-addicted themselves, leading to chaos, violence, and tragedy as their hard-won sobriety was destroyed by Vault-Tec's manipulation. Vault 95 in Fallout 4 represents one of the most psychologically cruel experiments, giving people hope for recovery then deliberately destroying it for scientific data. Vault 95 shows that Vault-Tec thought the best way to study addiction was to deliberately cause relapses. But the next Vault decided to experiment with environmental conservation. Vault 96. This Ark Vault housed a small group of scientists tasked with preserving animal and plant life for post-war repopulation, but the AI secretly enforced harsh productivity quotas and punished failure with poison gas. When scientists attempted to destroy the controlling AI, it responded by gassing the entire Vault population. The preserved animals and plants eventually escaped when the Vault doors opened, creating new mutated species throughout Appalachia. Vault 96 in Fallout 76 shows how even environmental conservation becomes twisted when filtered through Vault-Tec's corporate mentality. If you thought environmental protection was noble, the next Vault was designed to never let anyone experience freedom. Vault 101. This Vault was designed never to open, creating a permanent study of life under autocratic rule by the Overseer. The experiment tested how long people could be kept in isolated dictatorship without rebellion or psychological breakdown. Eventually, manipulation and unrest led to rebellion and the player character's escape in Fallout 3. Vault 101 represents one of the series' most recognizable experiments, the complete denial of human freedom disguised as safety and security. The Vault shows how easily protection can become imprisonment when those in charge have absolute power. But the next Vault decided to drive everyone insane with chemistry. Vault 106. This Vault released psychoactive drugs into the air supply after just 10 days, causing residents to experience hallucinations and violent behavior without any warning or explanation. The experiment tested the effects of involuntary chemical manipulation on human psychology and social structure. Inhabitants became completely deranged, with drug-induced hallucinations leading to violence and the complete breakdown of society. Vault 106 in Fallout 3 represents one of the most straightforward experiments: chemical warfare against the Vault's own residents. The Vault shows how quickly civilization collapses when reality becomes unreliable. If you thought chemical manipulation was horrific, the next Vault created an army of clones. Vault 108. This Vault featured a cloning lab that produced dozens of mentally unstable clones named Gary, while the Overseer was given terminal cancer and the power systems were designed to fail halfway through operation. The experiment tested what would happen when cloning technology was left unsupervised in a failing system. The Gary clones eventually overwhelmed the scientific staff and killed most residents, now wandering the Vault, endlessly repeating their own name. Vault 108 in Fallout 3 demonstrates how cloning experiments become horror shows when combined with inadequate oversight and failing infrastructure. But the next Vault froze time itself. Vault 111. This Vault placed all residents in cryogenic stasis under false pretenses, telling them it was for decontamination while actually testing the effects of long-term freezing on human subjects. The experiment tested whether humans could be successfully preserved for future use without their knowledge or consent. Power failures and staff deaths led to most residents dying in their frozen sleep, with only the sole survivor emerging 200 years later to begin Fallout 4. Vault 111 shows that Vault-Tec thought the best way to preserve humanity was to freeze them without permission. If you thought cryogenic imprisonment was cruel, the next Vault created digital hell. Vault 112. This Vault placed residents in virtual reality pods controlled by the sadistic Dr. Braun, who used the simulation to torture them for his own amusement for over 200 years. The experiment tested how long human consciousness could survive in virtual environments while being subjected to endless psychological torment. Residents lived in the Tranquility Lane simulation where they could experience death and trauma repeatedly without dying, creating perfect psychological torture. Vault 112 in Fallout 3 represents the ultimate fusion of technology and sadism, using virtual reality to create personalized hell for every resident. But the next Vault decided to test class warfare directly. Vault 114. This Vault was designed to house social elites in drastically underfunded and uncomfortable conditions, while being overseen by someone specifically chosen for inexperience and incompetence. The experiment tested how wealthy, privileged people would react to sudden poverty and poor leadership. The Vault was never fully occupied when the Great War began, but it represents Vault-Tec's interest in studying class conflict and social reversal. Vault 114 proves that Vault-Tec thought the best way to study privilege was to take it away and watch people suffer. And finally, the most openly elitist experiment, Vault 118. This vault provided ultimate luxury to a handful of wealthy and creative residents, while others served as their staff, testing class conflict and division within a closed system. The experiment examined whether extreme inequality could be maintained indefinitely in confined spaces. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, the Vault has become a murder mystery setting among the roboticized upper class, who continue their class-based society even after death. Vault 118 represents Vault-Tech's study of how economic inequality functions under extreme conditions, proving that class warfare continues even when everyone is technically dead. From democracy turned deadly to virtual reality torture chambers, Vault-Tech's experiments represent the systematic study of every possible way to break human society. Each vault tested different variables: overcrowding, isolation, chemical manipulation, artificial scarcity, technological dependence, and social engineering to determine how much suffering humans could endure before civilization collapsed. The vaults prove that the most dangerous enemy of humanity isn't radiation or mutants, but human curiosity without moral boundaries. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every power armor model explained, click the video on the screen.